Praise be to God, there is no other God except God. If you are watching this video because a believer whom you know has died and you wish to know how to do the funeral contact prayer for him or her, first of all, let me express my condolences to you and to the person's family. However, because this is a prayer which happens rarely, it is supposed to be known and led only by the congregation directors. And if you don't have an authorized local congregation director to lead you in the funeral contact prayer, feel free to skip to the last 2 minutes of this video where I will lead you in that prayer as your temporary online congregation director. But let me explain this prayer for the purposes of general understanding anyway. The funeral contact prayer is a prayer which is mentioned in the Quran in verse 984. And it should be done as it was traditionally done by the Muslims, although a few parts of it change according to the circumstances. So now let's imagine that a person named John Doe died. If he was not part of our congregation, which means that he did not mobilize or organize with us, then we do not observe the funeral contact prayer for him, according to verses 971 through 984. We should only organize funeral contact prayers for submitters and dependent submitters of our congregation. If he was a family member of one of us, but he was not a submitter or a dependent of one of us, you as the family member may talk to God about him to express your emotions, pray to God to potentially forgive him, or you can pray to God with a conditional prayer, something like, if he was a believer, please God forgive him, or things like that. But we do not organize an official funeral contact prayer for that person. He belonged to another congregation, whichever it was, and let that congregation deal with it. You may express your condolences to the family members when a person from another religious community dies, but again, we do not organize funeral contact prayers for people who do not belong in our congregation. Jesus said in the Bible, let the dead bury their own dead. Now let's imagine that the person named John Doe is part of our congregation, either a submitter or a dependent of a submitter. The person in our congregation who hears about it first informs the congregation directors. Then the congregation director informs everyone in the congregation by sending an official email to everyone. And if the congregation is one of the 12 online congregations, he sends them this video to lead them in that prayer. And each member in that congregation does the funeral prayer after they receive the email. Each of them does it separately because it is not practical for an online congregation to get together in the same location. Each of them performs ablution and does the funeral contact prayer. The whole community of submitters does not need to do it. Only the people who are in that same online congregation as the deceased person. Now, if John Doe was part of a non-online local congregation, then again, the local congregation director is informed. He informs everyone in the congregation, and then he also informs them at what time and place the burial will be held, and then tells them whether the funeral contact prayer will be done at that burial place or whether it will be done beforehand at another location where the casket is waiting, like at the yard of the mosque, or maybe there is some kind of institution which deals with these issues, but not inside the mosque. Then the people gather at that time and place, and the congregation director leads the funeral contact prayer. Now here is how the funeral contact prayer is done. Unlike the other contact prayers, during the whole funeral contact prayer, there are no bowings and prostrations. The whole funeral contact prayer is done standing up. So let's say that John Doe has died. There are 10 steps which we need to follow. 1, we perform ablution at our homes. 2, then at the prayer location we face the Qibla and we make the intention. We intend to do the funeral contact prayer for John Doe. 3, we say Allahu Akbar. 4, the first surah of the Quran is recited by the prayer leader. 5, we say Allahu Akbar again. 6, we ask God to bless the close ones of John Doe. 7, we say Allahu Akbar again. 8, we ask God to forgive John Doe. 9, we say Allahu Akbar again. And 10, we say Assalamu alaikum while turning our head to the right side. And then again, Assalamu alaikum while turning our heads to the left side. And that's it. The official funeral contact prayer for John Doe is done. So the whole prayer consists of saying Allahu Akbar 4 times. And after each time, we say something. After the first time, the prayer leader recites the first surah of the Quran. After the second one, we seek God's blessings for the loved ones of the deceased. After the third one, we ask God to forgive the deceased. And after the fourth one, we say the salams. Now, Allahu Akbar, Surah 1 and the salams are said aloud in the Arabic, while everything else is said silently in your own language and in your own words. the way you feel at that moment, not pre-planned. Now the question is, how do we know that this is the correct way to do the funeral contact prayer? Well, given that the Quran in the Arabic calls this a contact prayer, and given that all contact prayers are guaranteed to be preserved by God in the Abrahamic tradition, then this as a contact prayer was preserved as an Abrahamic tradition, and therefore it reached us without being lost. Someone might say, does this mean that every tradition which exists among Muslims is true? Well, no, because the Quran gives us this guarantee only about the contact prayers, zakat, fasting, and hajj, but not about the other traditions. And because the Quran calls the funeral contact prayer a contact prayer, then it must be within that protected tradition. The people may choose to call other things contact prayers, but if the Quran does not call it a contact prayer, then it is not within the Abrahamic tradition. So because the Quran calls it a contact prayer in Arabic, it puts it within the preserved Abrahamic tradition. And therefore we can know how to do it from the tradition of Abraham's descendants. Now, of course, God allows things to be added to these traditions, but He guarantees that nothing will be lost. So this is the tradition. And we know for sure that nothing was lost. But how can we know that nothing was added? Because that guarantee does not exist in the Quran. Keeping something preserved means that nothing was lost, but it does not mean that nothing was added on top of it. Well, if something was added, it will contradict the Quran, because the Quran completely covers everything we need to know about religion. So let's just check them one by one and see if any of these points contradicts the Quran. So point 1 does not contradict the Quran. It is actually found in the Quran in verse 5-6, which tells us to perform ablution before the contact prayer. And the funeral contact prayer is called a contact prayer in the Arabic Quran. So it also applies to it. Points 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 10 also exist in the regular contact prayer, which we already know that these points are not against the Quran. The only different points from the regular contact prayer are points 6 and 8. So are these points against the Quran? Let's start with point 6, asking God to bless the close ones of the deceased. God willing, I will explain this in a video clarification titled The Flow of Blessings, where among others I will explain how when a believer dies and is blessed in heaven, that blessing is proportional to the increase in blessings of the close ones of that person who are left in this world. And this is in most cases reflected in the inheritance. When a father dies, for example, the children among the closest ones are blessed with more wealth because of the inheritance which they received. But this flow of blessings is true even in cases when it is not reflected in the inheritance. So this is true no matter what. And the inheritance is just one example of it. Verse 3, 171, tells us that when the believers die, they have good news about the other organized believers here on earth about God's blessings and grace. And knowing this, it is a perfect opportunity to pray for it beforehand, because God says that the prayers of the believers are answered. And by praying for it beforehand, we make sure that we deserve those blessings. And the close people of the deceased can be anyone, especially those whom the deceased respected due to religious reasons. And when the submitters during Muhammad's time, when Muhammad was alive in this world, implemented this principle, they would pray for God to bless Muhammad first, because the Quran says in verse 33:6 that the Prophet was closer to the believers than they are to each other. So Muhammad was the closest person to any believer who died during his time. And because we have to pray to God to bless the closest of the deceased, that would mean that they had to pray to God to bless Muhammad. And to this day, this is how the Muslims implement this part of the prayer. However, they are forgetting that the verse 33:6 says the Prophet. And anywhere in the Quran, whenever Muhammad is referred to as the Prophet, it is always during his lifetime and not after his death. This is already known. So it was perfectly correct to ask God to bless Muhammad during the funeral contact prayer of any believer during Muhammad's time, because we are supposed to pray to God to bless the closest people of the deceased. And the closest person, or the most beloved, to any believer during the time of Muhammad was Muhammad himself. But they had live, meaningful interactions with him, which is why they felt close to him. They weren't respecting him as some kind of mystical figure whom they never met, like they do it today. They really felt close to him While today the true believers should feel as close to Muhammad as to any other prophet of the past, because we did not meet any of them, including Muhammad. And they are equally beloved to us, and if we distinguish Muhammad in the prayer, when clearly all the other prophets have the same merits as prophets, then we are making a distinction between God's messengers. And this is prohibited in the Quran. So if the believers feel emotionally closer to a messenger compared to the other messengers, that can only happen when that messenger is with them alive. So today it would ironically be correct during a funeral contact prayer to ask God to bless Alban and also the other close believers, but only if you met me. This part of the prayer should be done silently anyway, and everyone does it in his own words, and people should not discuss with each other how to do it or how they did it. They just internally ask God to bless the closest people of the deceased silently, and whether they mentioned me while I was alive, that should never be known. And which other close ones of the deceased person they mentioned, that is their own choice, and a momentary internal expression of emotions and thoughts. However, if they mention me in a person's funeral prayer when he never met me, that would be indirect idol worship. But anyway, the rule in point 6 here is to pray to God to bless the closest people of the deceased person. And how that is expressed in words in different times changes depending on the circumstances, depending on who the people think were the closest people to the deceased person. Now let me talk about point 8 here, asking God to forgive the deceased person. According to verse 47:19, we should ask God to forgive the believers. So point 8 also is not against the Quran. And actually it is implied from verse 980 that asking God to forgive the deceased believer is part of the funeral contact prayer, because within the same discussion the funeral contact prayer is mentioned a few verses later. So this is how the funeral contact prayer should be done. And now, if a submitter in your online congregation has died, you are obliged to do the funeral contact prayer for him or her. And let me lead you as your temporary online congregation director in this prayer through this video. After performing ablution, face the Qibla, turn this video on, and just repeat after me. I will speak loudly the parts which you should say loudly, and I will write here the parts which should be said silently internally by you. And you can just fill in the blanks in your mind with people's names. Let's begin. Allahu Akbar. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم.